You're listening to Nutrition Matters Podcast with Paige Smathers, registered dietitian nutritionist. Hey everyone, it's Paige, your favorite nutrition podcaster and dietitian. Nutrition Matters Podcast explores what really matters in nutrition and health with a sensitive and realistic approach. This podcast relies on the support of listeners like you and needs donations to keep this project running. To help support the podcast, please consider making a donation at pagesmothersrd.com/podcast. If you find this episode interesting, engaging, or helpful in your life, please consider donating, sharing with friends and family, and leaving a review on iTunes. You can leave a review about this podcast straight from your podcast app. Search Nutrition Matters Podcast, click Reviews, and then write a review. You can also find me on Instagram and Facebook at Paige Smathers RD if you'd like to have a little more food for thought. Thank you for listening. Hey guys, it's Paige. Thanks so much for joining me for another episode of Nutrition Matters Podcast. And you are really in for a treat today. For anyone who hasn't heard already, there is a new documentary out called What the Health. It's available on Netflix. And it's caused quite the stir. There's a lot of people talking about it, a lot of people with very strong opinions on one end of the spectrum or another. And I really wanted to sit down with some dietitian friends to discuss this for you so that you can have hopefully a fair and balanced perspective on some of the claims in the film and some of the problems, and also highlighting some of the good things about it as well. So before we get into that, I always like to make sure that my listeners are aware of some resources available to them. The first is an online group for the podcast called Nutrition Matters Podcast Study Group that you are more than welcome to request to join if you'd like to be a part of the discussion there. It's a lot of fun and we'd love to have you. Another resource to be aware of is my online course, which is available at pagesmothersrd.com/course. This is a completely online course that's 10 weeks long, and you can take it at your own pace. And it's all about really helping you make healing your relationship with food and your body happen in real life. So often we read books or podcasts or blogs and things sound good, and we kind of struggle to figure out how to apply this in real life. And so that's what this course is all about. It's helping you bridge the gap from dieting into more of an intuitive approach to food and your relationship with your body as well. And it's kind of helping you take those stepping stones towards that rather than it feeling like one giant leap of faith. And the best part about the course is that you have lifetime access to it. You can also have lifetime access to an online support group that I am in on a daily basis, helping to answer questions and recording videos and really being there to support you along the way. And so if you're interested in checking out the course, head on over to pagesmothersrd.com/course just to get more information about it and to read what people are saying about the course and see if it might be a good fit for you. And as always, I would love it if you would take some time to leave a review for me on iTunes. So you can do that from your phone if you have an iPhone, or if you can do it from your computer as well. And what you do is you just search for Nutrition Matters Podcast and you click on the logo, and then you click on ratings and reviews, and then leave a review. And I would love to hear from you. I read every single one of those, and it's so fun to hear how the show is affecting people and helping people. And it also helps more people find the show when I get more reviews. So take a minute and do that if you haven't already. All right, so let me quickly introduce my two guests today. My first guest is Kathleen Herdner, who is a registered dietitian, certified diabetes educator, and also a certified intuitive eating counselor in Yellowknife in Canada. Did I say that right? Yellowknife. She's going to tell you later. I might have said that wrong. And then I also have Vinci Choi, who is joining me from Canada as well, in Alberta. And she is a dietitian as well, who is in private practice, a very active blogger, and she has just some really, really great perspectives on intuitive eating and reclaiming kind of your own power around food. So I invited these two to come on the podcast with me to talk about this new film called What the Health. And we really dive into the science and kind of talk about what's true about what they say and maybe what isn't as true. And for anyone listening who's sort of on high alert, maybe you are a vegan and maybe you're listening and kind of wondering what's Paige and her guest going to say about veganism? Or if you're on the other end of the spectrum and kind of wondering, what's going to happen in this conversation, I want you to stay tuned and listen to from start to finish. I think we make some really great points here. But I also want to just sort of set the stage and make sure that you understand that we're not here to bash veganism. We're not here to, make you feel like your life choices with your food are wrong. But what we're trying to do is just really have a fair and balanced approach to some of these claims that are made in the film. And basically what's important to understand is that science really doesn't show that you have to be 100% plant-based in order to be a healthy person. Yes, incorporating more plant-based foods can be a really good idea to do, no matter who you are. But whether or not you have to go gung-ho and 100% into veganism is a whole different question. Now, at the risk of sounding super corny here, this is an extremely meaty topic, and we go through as many of the facets of the documentary as we can, but we don't have time to talk about every single facet of every single claim in the film. So just keep that in mind. We're doing our best. There's so much to say, and I hope that what we've done here is help you scratch the surface and really dive into what you need to do to take care of yourself in the best way possible, both on a mental and a physical level. So with that, let's listen to Kathleen, Vinci, and I talk about the film What the Health. All right, well, Kathleen and Vinci, welcome to Nutrition Matters podcast. I'm so glad both of you are here to discuss this with me today.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Yeah, I'm excited to be here.
So Kathleen, do you want to start off and just take a minute to introduce yourself and talk about who you are and what you do, just so that the listeners can follow along with who's talking and your background?
Yeah, so I'm a registered dietitian, certified intuitive eating counselor, and a certified diabetes educator. And I run a private practice way up north in Yellowknife called Pulse Nutrition YK. So I have kind of a focus on helping people improve the relationship with food and their bodies. So that's kind of a little bit about me.
And I have actually two Canadian dietitians with me today, which is fun. So Vinci, also from Canada, talk about you and what you do.
Sure. So my name is Vinci Choi. I'm a dietitian based out of Calgary, Canada. And similar to Kathleen, I take a very compassionate and collaborative approach to working with my clients. So I definitely use health at every side and intuitive eating philosophy in my work with my clients to help them reclaim their relationship with food and with their bodies.
Awesome. So we're all coming from a really similar perspective and lens, and I have a bias. I think that if you spend enough time working with people who come to you with nutrition issues, I almost think you can't help but land in that space where you're like, wait a minute, maybe our relationships with food are really important, and maybe the way that we think about food and talk about food and our bodies is just as important as taking good care of them through proper nutrition. I think it's just a natural place to land when you hear how much people struggle and how much suffering goes on in the food, in our relationships with food and our bodies. And it's easy to kind of say, you know what's really important here, what really matters. And that's exactly why I do this podcast, and that's exactly why we three wanted to have this conversation about this documentary. So with that, let's kind of introduce what we're talking about today. I'm so glad that both of you are willing to be here and help discuss this in a very fair and rounded out way. So the other day, I'll just kind of introduce how I came across this. The other day, I had this day where there was maybe 3 people who approached me wondering my opinion on this new documentary, What the Health. And I'll admit, I internally sort of rolled my eyes and said, oh, okay, I don't I don't want to watch that because the last thing I want to do when I'm home in my pajamas with my feet up is watch a documentary about food. Like I don't even care if it's like one that I completely love and agree with. I like to take a break from food in my real life. But I did it because I started seeing all this buzz. And then I reached out in a group that all three of us belonged to. And I said, hey, does anyone want to talk with me about this? So I watched it and it was really tough to get through. Especially those first, like maybe 15 minutes are just like, whoa, that's rough. But so that's why I wanted to have this conversation. I feel like people are talking about it a bunch. Documentaries, and I kind of use that term loosely, are popular with our current way we watch TV. We watch TV through Netflix and Hulu and Amazon and some other ways. We don't necessarily turn on the TV and just watch whatever's on. We have more autonomy about what we pick, and I think a lot of people are drawn to this information because we want good things. We want to be healthy. We want to be happy. But as we're going to talk about today, there are some concerns that we have about the film. How did both of you come across the film, and what made you interested and willing to talk about it here? Vinci, do you want to go first?
Sure. So I actually came about the film kind of different from most people did. I think, like, I am a blogger and I also used to be a food blogger. So I am on a lot of, I think, food and nutrition media lists. So the film was actually sent to me before it was released as a review copy. And it was interesting because in the email, and I'm just pulling it up now and reading it. So it said the film, so What the Health brings in medical doctors, researchers, and consumer advocates to expose outrageous corruption and the impact of big business on our health, and why the nonprofits we trust are staying silent about it. So I was going into the film expecting a behind the scenes look at like American healthcare in general. And so I actually even invited some dietitians over to watch it together. I was like, oh, I got this review copy of this movie. And I think I just had a very like visceral negative reaction to when it turned out to be a film, a vegan film. Like, not that I have anything against veganism, like just the way I said that wasn't probably the nicest way of putting it. But yeah, like I think I almost felt duped because it wasn't what I thought it would be about in the way that it was advertised to me as a review copy.
So in other words, it sounds like you weren't expecting some very planned out, like rigid, this is the answer for every person, this is the way you eat type of idea. You were expecting like just more exposure of what it's really like in the healthcare field, and just maybe learning some things that we don't normally talk about. And then when you realize that there's this really intense agenda, that as a dietitian who works with people with disordered eating and eating disorders, it's just kind of like, why are we recommending that for every person? I can see why that would be concerning. And again, not that veganism is necessarily, one size fits all, a terrible idea, right? Like, I think we want to be clear that, at least me, I'll speak for myself. Like, I'm not against veganism. I have some concerns because I've seen people use it in ways that aren't healthy for them. But veganism as a whole isn't an issue. And I think that that's an important thing that I want to say up front too. But Kathleen, talk about how you came across the film.
So I was actually giving a workshop the first time I heard about it, and I was asked about this documentary, and I got asked about it 5 more times that week. So I actually started watching it, and 15 minutes in, I paused it to ask if anyone else had watched it and written a review so that I didn't have to finish watching it. Like Vinci, I had a very kind of visceral reaction to it. And so I've spoken to a lot of people who, since watching it, have become vegans as well, which has been very interesting, because we can talk a little bit more about it later, but not necessarily the most balanced way of doing it, or for what I would consider the best reasons as well. again, everyone is a little bit different in terms of why they choose it. And I'm not against veganism. I think it just needs to have the reasoning behind it, needs to have the right reasons. And as well, making sure that they're not eating for getting deficiencies, right? Because the way that I've been talking to people, they just cut out the animal products and don't replace it with anything, which I think can be problematic as well. So like you, Paige, I was asked about it a lot. So that's Kathleen, why I started to watch it.
Do you watch The Bachelor or The Bachelorette? Do either of you guys watch it?
I will admit that I have watched it.
Okay.
I don't watch it
I will
regularly.
admit that I kind of love it. It's like my one little show that's so dumb that I watch. But they always talk about, like, are you here for the right reasons? And when you were like, okay, you can be vegan, but it has to be for the right reasons, it just kind of made me laugh. Anyway, so let's just quickly talk about one thing that really stood out to me in the film was they kind of bashed dietitians, right? And they were like, all of them are just in bed with McDonald's and with the meat industry and with whatever, right? They just were like, you can't trust a word that they say because they're all sponsored, blah, blah, blah. Okay, so let's just take a minute and ease any concerns that listeners might have about any sponsorships any of us have. I'm proud to say that I don't get paid, or not proud, I guess. I don't know how to put it. I will just say outright, like, nobody pays me to podcast. I'm not talking about this because I'm in bed with the dairy industry or the meat industry. I'm talking about this because I really care about the people that I work with every single day. And I just want them to have happy, healthy lives. That's why I'm here. So why are you here, Kathleen? And what are any disclosures you need to make?
So I guess, first of all, I don't have any disclosures that I need to make. So I don't have any sponsorships or connection with the meat industry or the dairy industry. And I'm here as well because I wanted to have the conversation about the documentary because there is such a buzz around it. And I think it's important for people to see the other side of the documentary, to have that kind of balanced approach instead of just taking it at face value and thinking that documentary is therefore the be all end all, and that's how they need to eat.
Perfect. Vinci, what about you?
Yeah, so I currently don't have any sponsorships from like the meat or dairy industry, though a few years ago I did some work with Alberta Pork, and I also had approached a local yogurt company that I had really liked about doing some promo work for them, like just because I really liked their product and I love that they were a local company, but that never came to fruition. But right now, I don't have any disclosures. Mm-hmm.
Perfect. I just think that that's an important thing to mention, especially since the documentary talks about makes it kind of sound like people like us are just totally wrapped up and enmeshed with those industries. So, okay, good to know, good to get out of the way, and good to talk about. So, okay, I've been sort of debating and wondering how to have this conversation. I reached out to my Facebook audience, both in my Facebook group for my podcast and then also in just my professional Facebook page. I just put out a word saying, hey, I'm going to be having this conversation about this documentary. What would you like to hear us talk about? Because, we can talk about what's interesting to us, but I think really what we're trying to do is make sure that we're helping to clarify and also show another side for the people that we care about and the people that are our clients. And so the thing that came up most when I put the word out to my following was, let's just show another side to the science that he puts out there. And so I was wondering, is that okay with you guys if we just kind of hit on some of the main, scientific themes and show another side and maybe talk about, epidemiological studies and talk about the problem with the word, this food causes this condition. I mean, that causal relationship is problematic. His discussion of diabetes for me was like, you're a certified diabetes educator. Kathleen, that's awesome. I was trained as a diabetes educator in the hospital. I never got certified because I went to outpatient and didn't get my hours in. But I feel very confident talking about diabetes as well. So that's sort of what I want to hit on. And then let's see if we have time to talk about some of the other things. But I think that seems like it would be one of the most useful things for us to spend our time with today. Does that sound okay?
Yeah, definitely.
Okay.
Yep.
So I'm going to pull up my outline here, and you guys kind of got a little insight into my brain because I was just typing frantically as I was watching it, taking notes, and some of them weren't very nice. So we've all talked about how those first like 15 minutes are just chock full of so many red flags. And the first one that really stood out to me is okay. The WHO, World Health Organization, came out, I think maybe a year or two ago, with a report about carcinogens and processed meat, and actually did a podcast about that. So there's a whole podcast discussing this thing that came out. But the way that they word it in the documentary is that processed meat is a group 1 carcinogen, and then this is a direct quote, definitively linking cancer to processed meat. Okie dokie. What are the problems here? I have so many thoughts. Who wants to take a stab at this? Vinci, do you want to go first and talk about kind of your visceral reaction to this linking cancer to processed meat comment in the film?
Yeah, well, I mean, kind of like you said, Paige, like this was a report that came out a year or two ago. So it's still like kind of fresh in my memory, what happened when that report first came out. And yeah, like I think in the news there was controversy, and even the WHO came out and said, yes, like what a group 1 carcinogen means is that there is a connection there, but there's a difference in the dose, right? So smoking is also a type 1 carcinogen, but it definitely takes a lot less smoking compared to processed meat in order for, that link for cancer to happen. But like, I think even the WHO says, like, the dose is different within the type 1 carcinogens. The type 1 carcinogen only kind of defines the level of evidence, but it doesn't necessarily define like the dosage that would, cause cancer, I guess.
So you know what else is defined as a type 1 carcinogen? Sunshine. So I think this is something that just boils my blood. When we forget that dose matters, right? Dose matters in life. Too much of a good thing is not good. Not enough of something isn't good either, right? So sunshine, you way up north there, I'm sure you guys have lots of vitamin D issues. We do, even in Utah where I live. And so we know that a little bit of sunshine is good for our bodies and really important for us. And I know that in the winter months here, when it's so dark and so gray, I struggle with just life. It's just harder, right? So I know that sunshine is important for me personally, and I've experienced the difference I feel when sunshine is around. But does that mean that I cut out all sunshine? If I cut out all sunshine from my life or from my children's lives, we'd be developing some really severe physical symptoms and issues, right? So that's this problematic sort of his approach to this journalistic documentary. It's pretty bad journalism to not say this is a type 1 carcinogen, and I know that that's scary and that's creating a reaction in you, but let's talk about the other type 1 carcinogens and what does that really mean, right? So that was my reaction to that comment in the film. What about you, Kathleen?
My reaction was really similar. If you actually look at the report, since we're talking about dosages, it was 50 grams per day every day of processed meats. So we could say, you know what, if you're eating processed meats every single day, maybe it might be a thing to look at backing off on it a little bit. But I don't think, like you said, that it means that people need to cut it out. Does it mean that if you have a hot dog at a campfire that you're going to get cancer? No, absolutely not. And I think it's important to think about the enjoyment of food, just like you kind of talked a little bit about the enjoyment of sunshine as well as the other factors that, if that's something that you enjoy, does it mean that you need to cut it out? No, absolutely not.
Okay, perfect comment. Thank you for that. And another issue with this word definitively linking cancer to processed meat consumption, that is problematic because this is a meta-analysis, right? And so what the World Health Organization did is it acquired around 800 studies, and it picked about 7 to make this claim. Now, if you really dive in and look, there really wasn't any type of looking into the other aspects of the processed meat. And I'm not here to be an apologist for processed meat, okay, I think it has a time and a place. I don't think it should be all the time in large quantities, but I don't think any food should be all the time in large quantities either, right? So please don't misunderstand me to be all for processed meats, saying we should all eat this at every meal every day. But what they didn't control for and didn't really necessarily look at is all of the other things that are added to processed meats in the processing of them, right? So we don't really know, is it due to the processing of the meat? Is it due to the certain additives, certain ingredients, certain processing? So that's difficult in and of itself to just know, hey, what about the processed meat is problematic? Second concern is this is an epidemiological study, meaning they're relying on people to remember in retrospect what they typically eat. So they're filling out food frequency questionnaires, which us as dietitians, we know, unless someone has a very severe eating disorder, most people can't even remember what they ate yesterday, So to ask someone, hey, what do you eat on average over the last year? Fill out, weekly, daily, about processed meat or broccoli or squash or rice. It's problematic in and of itself to acquire this information. It's not necessarily super, super accurate because it is very difficult for people to remember. I honestly, if you wanted me to tell you what I ate yesterday, I'd have to sit and think about it for a little while. This isn't, our brains kind of naturally filter out what's important and what isn't. And for most people, what you ate yesterday is not very important for today. So the nature of these observational epidemiological studies is problematic to prove cause and effect. The only way you can prove that something causes something else is by doing a way more rigorous type of study, which then would be deemed unethical to conduct in a nutrition setting because you would have to have a control group that doesn't have the intervention and then a group that does have the intervention. And the ones that do have the intervention, you're testing for whether or not that causes cancer. How ethical is it to expose a group of people that you think this intervention might cause cancer, right? That's not very ethical. So we can't do the gold standard of the double-blind, placebo-controlled trial, randomized controlled trial in these types of studies. So anytime you hear this food causes this chronic disease, you have to know that what they're referring to is an epidemiological study, which does not prove cause and effect. And so that's problematic in and of itself. And I wanted to say a word about that. What comments do you guys have about that? Did I get that right?
Yeah, definitely. It's interesting though that I think even the WHO is the type 1, the carcinogens, I don't know if they use the word definitive or I think they just use very strong evidence, but yeah, I think people would interpret that as definitive. So it is a good reminder that even though, yeah, they do have epidemiological studies with thousands and thousands of people, it's still not 100% for sure, this is what is causing cancer type of link. It's a really good reminder.
Well, and another important thing is that it's one specific type of cancer. It's colorectal cancer, right? It's not cancer as a category, right? So that also frustrated me that they didn't differentiate and say this one particular type. And, all cancer is devastating and tragic and so hard. And I don't blame people for wanting to villainize foods and people and environment. And I get that. We all want a reason to kind of make sense of really tragic things that happen in our lives to people that we love. But in this case, it's not fair to villainize an entire food group. And sometimes they even just say meat. They don't even say processed meat, right? Which they kind of get that wrong too. Go ahead, Kathleen. Did you want to say anything about my little rant there?
I thought that was interesting about the meat versus processed meat, because I don't know if you guys noticed this when they were talking about processed meat, they were even like canned fish and that sort of thing. And in my mind, I was thinking I wouldn't classify that as like a highly processed meat. So I thought that was very bizarre and odd, because I would think that it wouldn't get classified in that same category.
Yeah, I had the same reaction, and some of it I was kind of like questioning myself through the film. I was like, "Oh, I've never heard diabetes explained that way. I've never heard like canned salmon in being or called processed." So yeah, I had some similar reactions where I was like, "Wait a minute, am I crazy?" That's kind of why I wanted to talk to other people about this. And then if I feel crazy, I can't imagine how someone watching without training would feel, One other kind of thing I wanted to break down about some of the science around the film. They do some of that beginning montage of like children eating a hot dog that has a cigar inside of it. I mean, as a parent, that was just eye roll central. I mean, just so ridiculous. I'm sorry. I know I'm using some strong words here, but that just was so beyond unfair to the consumer and the viewer. I really wanted to talk about that really quickly, if you guys don't mind. So in the film, he compares the dairy and the meat industry with the tobacco industry. And he cites this number of like an 18% risk of developing cancer. I could have this wrong, but there's something, he uses this word, this figure of 18%. And when you really look at the data and you look at what he's talking about, it's clear that he has a misunderstanding of basic statistics, where there's a difference between relative risk versus absolute risk, right? So the number 18% that he cites is actually relative risk, not absolute risk. So to get an idea of how absurd it is to compare meat to smoking, or in our case, we've seen some of those memes going around with like eggs to smoking, right? 1 egg per day is equivalent to like a pack of cigarettes or something. That's what I'm seeing online. The relative risk for smoking is 2,300%, and the relative risk for processed meat is 18%, right? So it's not apples to apples that he's comparing there. So the 2,300% relative risk, in other words, what that means is it's people who smoke have a 23 time greater chance of getting cancer than those that don't smoke, okay? So relative risk is a ratio that's derived from comparing a group with a control group, right? So this is just a point I really wanted to make. The relative risk in the case of processed meat, if you have 100 people who ate meat and then 100 who didn't, 2.95 people out of that 100 who ate meat would get colorectal cancer, whereas only 2.5 people in the control group that didn't eat meat would get colorectal cancer, right? So that's the 18% increase that we're talking about. So out of 100 people who eat meat, 2.95 will get colorectal cancer. 100 people who don't eat meat, 2.5 people will get colorectal cancer. So that's that relative risk of 18%. That is not absolute risk. So the absolute risk would actually be less than 0.5%. It's 0.45%. So I just wanted to break that down and talk about that. Some of my frustrations watching the film, and I'm not a statistician, right? Like I'm not, but I am trained in reading studies and interpreting them and using them in a practical way to help my clients. And so that's where I feel like I have skills in this area, is to sort of say, okay, here's what this particular research study is showing. Here's how you can use that for your life. And I just get very frustrated when that is used in really unethical ways. To me, that was a very unethical misinterpretation and misuse of science. And I struggle with the medical professionals who back that up. Any thoughts about what I just said? I hate to talk too much. I want to hear from you both too.
I'll start. So I totally agree with you. Like, and there are definitely other examples in the film too that I'm just like, this is ridiculous. I think there's one point where he gives a statistic about meat increasing the risk of, I don't know, something else, like maybe diabetes by like 50 something percent. And then in the graphic, it's literally like a single red bar just like shoots up on the screen. And that's supposed to represent like 53%. I mean, like if it's supposed to be a chart, there's no axis, there's nothing it's comparing it to. It's literally just like a red rectangle, like shooting up on your screen to represent 53%, or other like graphics like that too, that were just like not to scale and making things look big and scary.
Totally. I saw that too. And I had the same thought, like, wait a minute, if we're going to be scientific here, let's put some numbers on the X and the Y axis. Let's talk about what we're looking at. Let's be accurate. It's just frustrating when you throw out science as a way to back up your claim, but then you kind of take it away when it's convenient too. And you just kind of use like fear-mongering tactics when science can't back it up. Does that make sense? Kathleen, what were your reactions to anything that we've said in this last little bit?
I agree with both of you. It just seemed like pseudoscience to me when you say that it's science and then you just manipulate it in a way to suit your purposes. That's what the majority of the statistics and facts that were thrown out in this movie were. And I also wanted to say a little word about the experts. So at the beginning, when he was interviewing experts, there was a Dr. Goldhammer, I think his name was, that was interviewed. And I was curious who he was and what his credentials were. And he's actually a chiropractor at a clinic that promotes water cleansing. So in my mind,
what is water cleansing? I don't even know what that is. Do you know?
Where all you consume is water for, I think it was a long period of time, like where there's a huge amount of nutritional risk. So if you're interviewing someone who is part of their practice is to just give people water and consider it a cleanse, which, your livers and your liver and your kidneys are perfectly capable of cleansing your body. That makes me really, really question, what this person is saying. And so I think he was the first expert I looked up, and then I just kind of gave up because I no longer had a lot of respect really for the so-called experts that were interviewed in the film.
One other one was the Neil Barnard. I don't know if I'm saying that right. He was the diabetes expert, and I'm using quotes, that he interviewed. And when you look up his certifications and credentials, he's board certified in psychiatry. So it's fascinating that someone who's board certified in psychiatry is the diabetes expert. I mean, you'd really think, okay, someone board certified in endocrinology or nephrology or internal medicine. So that to me was just a little interesting. One other thing that I think is important to talk about, and this is not fair, but it's just something to think about, right? We don't need to be judgy, but whenever I hear, athletes do it, so it must be fine, or like this doctor is proclaiming that this is the way to go, so it must be fine. I just think that we need to take a step back and remember that people have issues. Like we all do, and just because you're an athlete doesn't mean that you have life figured out. And just because you're a doctor doesn't mean you have life figured out. And just because you're a dietitian doesn't mean you have life figured out either. But lots of people in those worlds, in medicine, in sports and athletics have issues about food. I'm sorry, they just do. Like these are driven people, these are type A, these are perfectionist tending leaning people. And so it's just again, we don't want to be judgy and think everyone has issues, but maybe just allow that to kind of enter your mind as you are kind of hearing their opinions and their thoughts and their proclamations, to just kind of say, I never know where their biases lie and how they approach life. And that was actually one of the big things that stood out to me in the beginning of the film was the narrator guy. I think his name is Kip. Is that right? Kip? Kip talks about how he has, cancer that runs in his family and diabetes and heart disease. And he goes on about his family history. And in my personal experience with my clients, whenever someone comes in the door with that type of like weight on their shoulders about what they're dealing with mentally about their health, that can often really affect how they view food. When you're so nervous about developing these chronic diseases, that will inform your approach to food. And so, we got an insight into that with Kip, but we don't really know what the other people he interviewed, we don't know their story and we don't know what they've been through and why they've landed where they have. But I would guess that some of them have some things to work through in that aspect. Is that fair? Did I say that in a gentle enough way? What do you guys think?
Like, I think so. Like, I think, yeah, like we don't get the whole story in a documentary like this. And I think even the way that the documentary has been presented, it's clear we're not getting the full story on anything. I found, like, I mean, we were just talking about the science and how the science was manipulated. Like, when I watched the documentary, I think one of the things that upset me about it was like nothing. It almost felt like nothing about it was 100% accurate, right? It was always like missing something or embellishing something. So yeah, like I wouldn't be surprised either if it was not telling us something about, what is going on with these professionals that were interviewed who feel like so good on the vegan diet or whatever it might be. Mm-hmm.
Kathleen, can you tell us your reaction as a certified diabetes educator to the conversation around diabetes? I would love to hear your reaction to that.
So I had one of those moments where I was like, am I crazy? Because I don't remember ever hearing anything about this. In our newest diabetes guidelines in Canada,
wait,
there was
really
a section...
quick, can you just talk about what they said so that if someone hasn't seen it, so that they know why you were confused? Just really quick.
Sorry,
That's okay.
I can't remember the exacts, but it was something around like meat and milk and
I can
causing a higher
explain it.
rate of diabetes.
Do you want me to explain?
Yes,
So
please.
this is
That would
what
be
I
lovely.
took from it. I could have it wrong. I could be paraphrasing wrong, but basically this is like a theory or a hypothesis that diabetes is caused from free fatty acids in the blood, meaning it's not attached to a glycerol, and that these fats in your blood are like going on top of the insulin receptor of your cell and basically like covering it up to not allow insulin to unlock that cell to let glucose in. So it's like, I think they said like it's gunking up the cells or it's like clogging them up. So basically what it comes down to is not only are we villainizing like meat and protein, I mean, not protein, but just meat, right? But now we're also villainizing fat, which frustrates me so bad because there's only 3 macronutrients, right? We can only work with protein, fat, and carbohydrate. That's how we get our calories. So when they're saying, oh, fat is so bad, and most of the protein category is so bad too, it's frustrating that it's like, here we are left with like food that's not very satisfying. Anyway, I'm getting on a tangent, but that's basically the theory that he is proposing. At least I think it's a theory. I don't think it's something that's like canonized, for lack of a better word, in textbooks and things like that.
Thank you for that reminder, Paige, because I'll be totally honest. I watched it a few weeks ago and I thought about watching it again and I couldn't bring myself to do it.
I don't blame you. You have better
Yeah,
things
I
to
was the
do.
same
myself for
way.
this.
Like I was like, okay, I'm gonna watch it twice for this podcast, and then I didn't.
That is okay, you guys. I would never want you to watch it more than once. I hardly could get through the first time.
Sorry for
But
interrupting.
yeah, no, that's okay. I mean, yeah, from a diabetes perspective, have I ever seen that theory before? No. And I worked in a diabetes specialty clinic. And when I studied for my certified diabetes educator exam, there was a whole lot of studying and reviewing the evidence. And not once did I see that. And the other thing that comes up for me, if we're talking about fat in the blood gunking things up, to me, that's a form of fat in the blood called triglycerides. And triglycerides are increased by not fat in the diet as much as things like sugar and alcohol. So, how are you making that discussion saying that you're gunking up the blood with fat when, in fact, that particular form of fat in the blood is most played upon by your sugar and things like alcohol? So, that really threw me for a loop. And I had an initial moment of like, well, I've obviously missed something because I don't remember ever learning that. But I don't think there's a lot to back it up, to be totally honest.
Right. No, and this is fascinating because not that I'm a proponent of ketogenic diets, but they have been studied in terms of what happens in your body, and a high fat ketogenic diet with this theory you'd think would cause higher triglyceride levels, but it's actually associated with a lower triglyceride level, which makes sense because of what you're talking about, right? Like a really high sugar, high alcohol diet can lead to elevated triglyceride levels. And so, yeah, this is just it. When I saw that, I had a moment of like, whoa, is this new? Like, since I've been in school and I just missed this, or what happened? And yeah, I think the best way to categorize it is it's just maybe just like a theory or a hypothesis that sort of confirms a bias. And we all have them, right? Like, I'm not trying to act like I have zero biases. I know that I do, and I try to work through that. But yeah, we all do. And that was one of the arguments in the film was, well, all of these organizations are getting paid to say these things, or they're in bed with these organizations, or they are funding research that confirms their conclusions already. And I think that is something that people in the camp of the same of the vegan perspective, they're guilty of that too. There's always cherry picking of data to confirm your bias, and there's always funding research that you think will confirm your already preconceived conclusion. And that's not good science. Like, let's just say that outright. Like, that's not good science, no matter who's doing it. But I don't think that there's one group of people like the vegans or the vegan researchers that just magically don't do that. I think that we are all sort of needing to check that bias. Okay, so the conversation about diabetes is problematic. Also, I'll just also say, development of diabetes is very complicated. It's not as simple as saying, oh, there's fat in the blood, boom, done. I mean, this is the same with any disease process. We have to just take a step back and just look at it from a bigger picture and say, gosh, there's a lot going on here. There's genetics, there's lifestyle, there's the way we eat, there's our mental health, there's our stress levels, there's our work and our sleep and our self-care. So that's another frustration when people try to sort of pick out and say, oh, well, this is the one reason. It's never one reason. It's never simple. Any comments about that, you guys?
I agree 100% with you. And I think that's why it gets so confusing for consumers, is because everyone tries to pick out one factor because they want to make it simple and they want to prove their point of like, this is the thing that's going to save your health. It might be, eliminating animal products or eliminating carbohydrates or whatever it is. And then they end up conflicting because it's not just one thing. And that's what ends up making people feel like it's so confusing. So I give up. What's the point? And I think that's just kind of the overarching theme with all of these sorts of documentaries with biases. And that's what I find so frustrating about watching them, is exactly as you said, there's so many factors, and trying to pinpoint it down to one means that you're missing everything else.
That's such a great comment. Totally agree. Vinci, what do you think?
Yeah, and I completely agree as well. That, yeah, like it is so complicating, and I don't know if it's necessarily making it confusing for people, because I almost think like that's what people are looking for, is they're like, yeah, just tell me the answer or give me the answer. And I almost think like that's why people like this documentary so much, or they like, similar documentaries so much, is because it gives them the answer when, as healthcare professionals, we know it's more complicated than that. And we try to express that to people, and people are like, well, I don't like to hear that it's complicating, or I don't like to hear that I don't have control over, like my genetics or my body size or whatever. And so they go to the people or the things that tell them, yeah, you can fix yourself, or this is the answer. Because I think that is actually what people are looking for, even though it's not true, if that makes any sense.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that is like human beings 101, right? Where this world is so complicated and so messy and so sad and confusing and disappointing and beautiful and everything, right? But we go through this really messy world and just try to simplify it and say good, bad, right, wrong, should, shouldn't. And it's just not true, and the older you get, the more you realize, like, wow, there maybe aren't easy answers. I actually heard this quote that kind of cracked me up. Let's see if I can find it here. The whole problem with the world today is that foods and fanatics are always so certain of themselves, and wiser people are so full of doubts. I think it's really true. It's like, the more I learned about nutrition, the more I realized, there's way more questions than there are answers. Okay, I need to be very cautious about making any sweeping claim about this causing that. I need to take a step back and really be humble about my claims, and be humble about what I think I know. And then I think that's the natural place you land when you do this work. But then when you see these people untrained who are just like, boom, here's the answer, it's just like, whoa, no, it's not. Here, think of all the other complexities. Okay, I want to switch gears a little bit and talk about, so I think we've done an okay job talking about some of the science. I know we could probably spend the whole time trying to debunk some of the science, and I think that that's important, but it's not everything. Let's talk a little bit about when you were watching this. I think as dietitians, we usually view things sort of through our clients' eyes a lot of times. At least I know I do. What concerns did you have from that perspective, of just someone that you work with and you care about and you really, really want to see be happy and healthy and successful in life? What did that bring up for you? Vinci, do you want to go first with that?
Sure. It's funny because when I watched it, kind of like I said, nothing of it felt true. And even just some of the ways that he interacted with, even the journalism, quote unquote, was so bad, because he would, call a call center and call the American Cancer Association and be like, why are there recipes with beef on on your website? And it's a guy at a call center. So obviously he's like, I don't know, and then Kip would just voice over and be like, obviously the American Cancer Association can't answer my questions. And it's like, well, because you just called the call center.
Yeah, no, that's kind of a funny point. Yeah, you weren't talking to a medical doctor. You were talking to whoever is helping to answer the phones there. Yeah.
Yeah, or I know like a lot of people are like, well, like the head of the ADA or the American Diabetes Association could have done a better job. But he was ambushed as well. I'm sure like he only got the interview by saying, like, oh, I'm doing this documentary and I have questions about your organization. Like, I'm sure he got the interview by being very vague. And then he shows up and bombards him with nutrition questions. And I think he is like a doctor or something. I'm not 100% sure. And he was just like, oh, I'm not here to answer your nutrition questions. And again, Kip is like, yeah, obviously, like they're hiding something from us. And it's like, well, no, because like even when you think of, as dietitians, I know we do some media interviews, like we go in and we have like talking points, or even for this podcast, we had some talking points that we discussed beforehand. You don't go in blind. And so, he was just out to make people look bad. And I think like what sort of upsets me about like how it's influencing so many people is like, I just feel like even for a vegan documentary, like none of the science is accurate. Like the way he interviews people is like, you can see on the screen that it's unethical. And so I'm just like, how is this still influencing people to, be like, oh yeah, like I really need to, become a vegan in order to be healthy. Like if that blows my mind, because to me, I'm just like, this is a really bad documentary.
What are your thoughts, Kathleen?
I think that they do a really good job of preying on your emotional fears. Like that's what it comes down to. Because I had the opposite of Vinci, where I had spoken to people. I can name at least 5 people in my head who went vegan because they watched this documentary. So, as dietitians, we look at it from a very scientific base of like, when I was watching the head of the American Diabetes Association, I was thinking like, I'm a dietitian and I wouldn't want to answer this guy's questions, So also I think we need to keep in mind that editing is really big and we have no idea what else happened in that interview. It's like watching reality television. And I think that's really important, as we have no idea what else was said before they took those points. And yeah, I feel like it's just blatant fear mongering. And I spoke to this woman in my office after she was the first person who asked me about the documentary, and she was pregnant, and I'm terrified. Like there's the paleo staff saying that I shouldn't be eating meat. And then there's this saying that I shouldn't be eating, paleo saying I shouldn't be eating carbs, and this saying I shouldn't be eating meat and dairy. And like, I don't even know what to do anymore. Like, what's the point? And it just breaks my heart to see the fact that this fear mongering is making people question everything. And I think that's kind of the perspective that I saw it from. It's just like, it preys on your fears so well that even though the science is not good, of course, people are going to react that way, because that's what he's good at, is that emotional piece, not the science piece.
Totally. Great comments. So I think it was the ADA, the American Diabetes Association dude. Was he a doctor? I don't remember exactly what his credentials are, but that's where there was like a lot of sort of confrontation. And for those of you who haven't seen it, don't worry about watching it. But basically what happens is the Kip dude tries to say, why do you have these things on your website? Why don't you want to find a cure? Or basically accusing him of not wanting to find a cure for diabetes. And then he says, what is the diet for diabetes? What should people be eating? And the guy just says, look, I'm not going to talk about that. And then it sort of spirals out of control, and they kind of fight back and forth, and he gets up out of his chair and leaves. And then Kip says, wow, I guess they really just don't want to find a cure or prevention for diabetes, and it's just sort of like, oh, it's because they're just evil people. And that part really got to me, because I can see where the guy is coming from. I have a perspective on food and nutrition that it is up there with like religion and politics, of things to just not discuss with family. Like it brings up some extremely strong emotions in people. And this documentary is a perfect example of that. So if we imagine that, let's just say Kip was Christian and the interviewee, ADA guy, was an atheist. And let's say that the interview starts off with like, "Tell me about atheism. How do you like that? How are you doing with that? How are you moral? Whatever, asking some just questions that are easy." And then he starts saying, "Well, like, do you just like want to die and like never have salvation?" And like, kind of like, what if he starts to try to convince him that Christianity is the one and only way? But this ADA guy is convinced that atheism is just the way that's the way he feels good about living life. I see that interaction that those two had as more of like a religious back and forth, and less of a, oh, the ADA representative just doesn't want to find a cure. I think he's just like, you know what? I'm not engaging in this dogmatic religious sort of pursuit with you because I don't think we're ever going to agree. And I also felt for the ADA guy because what he's trying to say is there's no one right way to eat. I refuse to answer your question because there is no answer. There is no clear answer. It's very complicated. It's very complex. And maybe, he and his organization is not in charge of medical nutrition therapy. And maybe he doesn't know the proper way to explain the complexities and nuances of an approach to diabetes way of eating, whether that's prevention or whether that's management. And maybe he just didn't want to get into it because he felt like, I'm not the right person to talk to about this. This is complicated. This is nuanced. And so I just wanted to point out there, like, I think that they were having more of like a religious back and forth debate, less of a factual back and forth debate. And they just plain old don't agree on their approach to life and their pursuit of health. And, that's okay. But to blame the ADA guy, I feel bad that I'm calling him that. I should know his name, but I don't. To blame him and say, oh, he just doesn't care about a cure or prevention, I thought was extremely unfair to him. And you're right, I forget which one of you mentioned this, but who knows if he was even prepared for what questions were going to come at him. He really seemed like he thought they were going to have this nice conversation about atheism or Christianity, but then it turned into this like, no, I need to convert you, or I'm mad at you, or whatever. And I think that he reacted like, nope, we're not going there. That was my thoughts. What do you guys think? Am I crazy with that analogy?
Yeah, and I think like I'm seeing Kathleen and I were both like nodding the whole time that you were that you were talking. So yeah, you're absolutely right. Mm-hmm.
I just felt for that poor guy. What were we going to say, Kathleen?
I agree as well. I really don't blame I feel bad calling him the ADA guy for not saying like this is the one way to eat, because like we talked about, it's so much more complicated than that. So of course he's going to say, I'm not going to have this conversation with you when you're clearly have an agenda, and I'm not going to bend to that agenda.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay. I'm glad we hit on that because that was one of those really emotional parts. And the conclusion that Kip draws is, well, clearly the people at the top want us to say sick, and it's just like,
I think you do a really good impression of him, Paige.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, I should get into that line of work. I'd be good at the opposite type of documentary. No, I'm just kidding. I wouldn't. Okay. So, okay. I just wanted to take a minute to talk about, I think take-home messages would be a good place to go. What do you wish people knew about this? What do you wish people took away from this? What do you want people who are feeling kind of on the fence about, okay, do I need to be vegan to be healthy? What do you wish people knew, and what do you wish people took away from it if they did watch it, or if they're just listening to this conversation? What do you hope they take away from the conversation? Kathleen, do you want to go first?
Yeah, for the takeaways for the film, I think first of all the things we spoke about, in that the science is not as concrete as they said. And I will take a step back though, and I do think that as a whole in North America, maybe we do eat more animal products than is necessary or good for our health. And I think it's a fair and valid point to say, you know what, maybe we don't need to eat a 16-ounce steak every night at dinner, and maybe, adding in some beans and nuts and that sort of thing is important. And I will say I appreciated that the movie didn't fearmonger about sugar and carbohydrates. That's one nice thing that I have to say about it, is I appreciated that. But I think the take home is that if you are concerned about this film, keep in mind that the science is not as solid as they think. And if you're concerned, then maybe start adding in some beans and a meatless Monday or something. But it doesn't mean that you need to be vegan to be healthy, because you can definitely be healthy while consuming animal products.
Great thoughts. I love that. Minchi, what about you? What do you want people to take away?
I did not enjoy this film at all. So in my perfect world, no one would watch this movie, because I know some people are saying that, oh, well, it's a good thing that it's promoting a more plant-based diet. Or I have other people saying too, it's getting people, to question maybe the politics behind our dietary recommendations. In Canada right now, there's a lot of buzz around, we have a new food guide that might be coming out that might be placing less emphasis on animal-based proteins. And people are kind of seeing that as maybe that does mean that, we're having less influence from the meat and dairy industries. That it's just a good thing for starting a discussion. But to me, I think at the end of the day, there are better non-fear-based ways to present this information. And really, if people are choosing a vegan diet based on fear, that's not the relationship with food that we want people to have. So, I would even argue, maybe, if you're not going vegan, maybe the filmmakers don't think that they've won yet, right? That they actually want people to be 100% plant-based. So even if you're oh, after watching this film, I want to do a meatless Monday or whatever, I almost think that the filmmakers would hear that and feel I don't think my job is done. I need to put more fear into people, into how bad any meat or any animal product is. And that's not a good thing, because going back to, this idea of trying to scare people into changing their eating, that's exactly what, this whole war on obesity thing, or fat shaming or weight stigma is all about. They're trying to scare people into losing weight, or scare people who are heavier into they're assuming that they're not caring about their health. But we know that it doesn't work. We know that, fat shaming and weight stigma has not caused a mass weight loss or anything like that. Or so why are we using those same fear tactics to try to change people's eating habits when we know that it doesn't work? So I don't know. I kind of feel bad, because I feel I have nothing good to say about this film, but yeah, I just feel there are good messages that they're trying to put out, but there are way better ways of doing it that don't involve, bad science and bad journalism.
Yeah, I think it would be easier to take little nuggets of truth from it if it were more balanced, Vinci. So I feel if they were a little more fair and balanced in their approach to okay, here's how we see it, but here's how other people see it, I feel the viewer would be able to say, oh, okay, so yeah, there are people who are really healthy and happy, living great lives, who take little nuggets from this but don't really do it all. And there's a different sort of blueprint for how to incorporate some ideas but not let it rule your life or whatever. I think that it would be easier to kind of walk away and say, okay, yeah, I'll take some from that and not from the other. But the approach that they take is very much gung-ho, black or white, all or nothing. You're in or you're out. You're in and you're healthy, or you're out and you're just a lost cause to this world, basically. And so I think that to me, when I hear you talking about how you have nothing good to say about it, that's sort of where my head goes, is I bet it's because it was so all or nothing, and it was very hard to be oh, okay, I like that little truth, I'm going to take that. They just didn't really set the viewer up to be able to do that. But I think we as dietitians who care about health and well-being, yeah, like maybe there is just some permission that people need to have to like take some things from it if they want, I guess, or not, and that's fine too. Um, my overall thoughts, and I'd love to hear your opinions and back and forth sort of discussion about this, is when I take a giant step back from this film and I just think about my clients and people in my life who I love, um, and just myself too, like I just flat out refuse to live my life in fear. Like I don't want to make decisions for myself or my family because I'm afraid. And you know what? There are reasons, there are infinite reasons to be afraid in this world. There really are. We could think about never driving a car because you might get in a car accident. And there, if you look at the statistics of that, it's a little alarming too. And I guess where I'm going with this is in the realm of food, there is a school of thought to support any fear you want to have about food. You can literally find at least one reason to be deathly afraid of any food. Um, and so, I mean, that's just something where I come down on it. It's just like, whoa. Like, I've worked with people who are afraid to put any food into their mouth because they've heard it all and they care about nutrition, they care about their health, and it starts with very innocent, pure motives. But they get to the point where it's literally like, I am afraid of every single food. And then what ends up happening is, like you said, Vinci, like they either just give up and say, well, screw it, I'm just going to eat whatever I want and not think about health because it's too confusing. Or they become more and more orthorexic and more, okay, I have 3 foods I can eat. Well, guess what, guys? That's not healthy. If you're pursuing health and you're only eating 4 foods, like that's not good. So I I like to kind of think of myself and my clients as our own gurus about our own bodies. And we need to have that autonomy and that power to make decisions about our bodies that feel good to us. And it's okay if that's veganism. It's okay if that's a little more plant-based than you're doing now. It's okay if that's somewhere in the spectrum. I mean, whatever it is, and it could look different from your spouse, it could look different from your best friend, and all of that's okay. And so I really think we lose sight when we give our power away and we say, okay, I watched this documentary. It told me what's right and wrong and what's good and bad, and I'm going to follow that because I don't trust myself. If I had a take-home message for a viewer, it would be, that's such a lie. You should trust yourself. You are so wise. You have everything you need in your body to make decisions about it if you learn to pay attention and to tap into that wisdom. That's what I would want people to know. And that's where I really think they didn't do any type of work in that arena. They didn't even touch on what a vegan diet can do to someone. What a really restrictive, I mean, for some people, they claim that they can do it. And I say the word claim because I don't have experience with it. I'm someone who would be starving all the time. I just would. I just would. They claim that they can do it and be fine. But then there's others who have tried veganism and that pendulum just swings right over into binging. And they never talk about that potential consequence of, if I go on a really restrictive diet with the hopes of curing, quote unquote, my chronic condition, and that doesn't work, or it gets too hard, or I go to a birthday party and just let loose, or whatever happens, and then you find yourself secretly binging in the pantry when your family's not looking, and you're doing that every day, and your health is suffering as a result. They don't talk about that, and not everyone can handle such a restrictive diet. And so that's something that I really think that they missed out on. What do you guys think? I'm sure that you've seen that in your work as well.
I think that was so well said, Paige. I really agree in that you can't just rely on exclusively outside sources. And I mean, I think we all have a very similar approach in that we do encourage clients to pay attention to what feels good in your body. So if you find that when you eat meat or dairy, you don't feel well, and if for that reason you choose to consume less of them, great. But saying, I'm going to do this really restrictive diet, even though I feel awful because I'm terrified, exactly as you said, it can definitely lead down that road of very disordered eating and a very unhealthy relationship with food. And I think that's a major problem.
And I completely agree that, yeah, like one thing that doesn't get talked about enough, not just in the film, but I think even in our healthcare in general, is this idea of trust and listening to our own bodies. Because I think this is almost something that we learn from, as kids to, listen to our parents and listen to our teachers, which yeah, we do have to as kids, obviously, but, but we never get to that place where we get permission to listen, to trust ourselves. And so, yeah, people feel like they have to turn to, ideally like dietitians or people who practice with an evidence base. But when that's not something that feels accessible to people, they turn to documentaries or blog posts or articles on the internet or whatever it might be. And yeah, and that's where we do run into issues, because we do get these conflicting messages and people get confused, and it tells people to kind of trust themselves less and less. So I think, yeah, I totally agree. Just kind of turning back and learning to trust yourself. That's kind of the big thing that I think we as dietitians and even other healthcare practitioners need to promote more, and, view these messages that we're getting from documentaries like What the Health with a critical eye, or at least to be able to say, how is this going to look for me, or how would this fit into my life?
Beautiful. Thank you so much for that. And you know what? This would be a really great place to stop because we just wrapped it up all nicely. But I'm not that organized. And I just had a really, I think, important thought that I want to hear your responses on. And then I think we'll wrap up. So let's talk about quickly, what are the benefits of meat and dairy consumption? Like, they didn't even go there. What are the benefits? And you don't need to get scientific here. I'm just talking like in your own life. Like, what do you get out of eating meat and dairy? Vinci, do you want to go first?
Sure. What I get out of eating meat and dairy. So I think like for for someone who like feels okay eating meat and dairy, like it is a good source of nutrients. So oftentimes people think of meat and dairy as kind of the protein rich groups. So it is like a convenient source of protein. And if we talk about like density too, like meat and dairy, it tends to have a higher density of protein than some of the other plant-based proteins that are out there. And they're also a good source of other nutrients. So if we talk about meat, it's often a good source of iron, phosphorus, or not phosphorus, but that's dairy. But like with milk, yeah, it's a good source of calcium and phosphorus, and so lots of other like vitamins and minerals. Or your animal products are our only source of vitamin B12. So if you are vegan, like you have to get that through supplementation. But that's kind of the sciencey stuff. Like otherwise, like meat and dairy are delicious. like I like, cheese and yogurt and meat and stuff. And I think sometimes what can be difficult with a very restrictive diet is it's the social aspect. Like being from Alberta, like kind of this province in Canada, we are known for being beef producers, and so it is like big, I guess, in our local culture to be like eating meat, or there's a huge like ranching sort of culture in the more rural areas. And so it's almost like a big part of like our identity as Albertans. Like, not to say that there aren't like vegan people who live in Calgary or Alberta, and not to say that that you can't socialize over plant-based foods. And I think, being creative with plants is really cool, but there are, I think benefits to having a varied diet that includes all foods as well.
That's a great thought. I love it. Kathleen, tell us about like what you think about that idea.
I agree 100% with Vinci. I mean, yes, there are a lot of like convenient, you covered the nutrition stuff pretty well for the meat and dairy, so I won't repeat that. But yeah, it can be delicious. Like I'm a dietitian and I love cheese and I love ice cream and all those things that maybe some people will be afraid of after watching this movie. And I think it's important sometimes for people to hear that dietitians eat a variety of foods. We're not just eating, salads and kale all day long, because that enjoyment piece is important. Like I like being able to go out for ice cream with friends and like those sorts of aspects that can be really, really isolating for people, especially where I live. I think we have one restaurant that serves vegan food, so you're pretty much restricted to that's the only place you can ever eat out if that's the way that you choose to eat. It's a fabulous restaurant. It's Ethiopian, but you can edit that out after. Um, but it can be very socially restricting if your friends are going out for wings and that's something you enjoy. And now all of a sudden you don't have that option. What are you going to do, right? Like there is that big social aspect of food that gets ignored really frequently along with the enjoyment piece.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was thinking too. I was thinking about how, every Sunday, my family and I, unless we have other plans, we make homemade pizza. And it's like this wonderful little process. We make the sauce, we buy the mozzarella cheese, we grow our basil in our window, at least right now. I used to have a garden, but I just moved. And it's just such a nice little tradition. And like I wouldn't be able to eat the sauce because it has butter in it. I wouldn't be able to eat the cheese. So what would I do? Like eat bread with basil on it? I mean, like what is that for me? Like that's so boring. And I really like about food. I value its ability to connect me to people. I value its satisfying nature. I value nourishment and I value balance. I mean, I have all these values around food that help me make decisions about it. And for me, I refuse any of those types of restrictions because they don't align with the way I want to live my life. And it's okay if they do align with the way you want to live your life. But to me, life is about a Saturday afternoon and going and getting ice cream with my two little girls. And to me, life is about, like enjoying all foods in the kitchen and not being restrictive. Life is about getting up from the table and feeling full and satisfied. And for me, I feel that way when I eat delicious, satisfying foods, including meat and dairy. And so that's something that I don't think that they touched on, just that how, I mean, I know vegans will swear up and down, like, I'm full, I'm satisfied, I'm good, I'm never hungry. But then I've heard others tell me that they are hungry all the time. So I think it maybe depends person to person. So I guess my point here is, and I think what we're trying to say is, what are the benefits of eating meat and dairy? Well, there's nutritional benefits, but there's also social benefits, there's lifestyle benefits, there's satisfaction that can be enjoyed. And all of those things, I believe, deserve a time and a place in how we make decisions around food. No, we are not robots, right? Like we don't just eat food and then, use that as energy in our bodies. Like food is so much more than fuel. It is fuel, but it's more than that. And so I think that's an important thing to keep in mind as we're navigating these decisions around food. So, okay, I think I'm looking through sort of the comments I got from people on Facebook wanting to hear us discuss, and I'm hoping that we hit on most of them. This, again, I think this conversation could be hours and hours long. There's so much to say, but I'm really hoping that this is a helpful resource for people, and I really want to connect anyone listening to both of you because it's always fun to introduce my listeners to new people to follow who are positive and who are sending out good messages into the world that can help people in their journey toward a healthier relationship with food in their bodies. So, Kathleen, do you mind going first and just talking about how people can stay in touch with you or follow you?
Yeah, so I am on Facebook. Pulse Nutrition YK is how you can find me. YK stands for Yellowknife. Everyone always asks me that. I used to be on Twitter and Instagram, and I'm not going to lie that it became a little much for me, so I'm not on there much anymore. And you can also find me online. My website is www.pulsenutritionyk.com. So that's where you can find me.
Perfect. And Vinci, what about you?
Yeah, so people can find me online on my website. It's just my name, vincichoi.com. It's not pronounced how it's spelled, so I will spell it. It's VINCCITSUI.com. And then all my social media, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, it's at VinciRD, so VINCCIRD.
Perfect. Okay. Well, all right. We've been planning this just for a few days. We've kind of put this together quickly. Do you guys feel like we did an okay job? Is anyone thinking, "Oh, I should have said that," or are you feeling like we wrapped things up okay? Go ahead, Vinci.
Yeah, I think we wrap things up okay. I think kind of one point I kind of wanted to make about the film was that, and maybe like this would go back to kind of my thoughts about it in the beginning of like expecting this like really deep dive into like the American healthcare system and then getting what, no offense, but kind of a really stereotypical vegan film. Like if you watch other vegan documentaries, like it's the same people that tend to get interviewed, like the same like pro-vegan, medical professionals that tend to get interviewed. Like, and there's always that emotional, like fear-mongering piece. And then also, yeah, kind of that bit at the end with like the people who are very sick and then they go on a vegan diet and all of a sudden like it's like unicorns and rainbows and happy music and like, their life is amazing. And so, it's interesting that we are talking about this movie specifically, but I would not be surprised if you could like play this interview and then watch another vegan documentary, and it like a lot of the same points would apply.
You know what? It's my first vegan documentary I've actually sat through. So that's good to know that they're all very similar. I would imagine that they are, yeah. Great thoughts. Thanks so much, Vinci, for being here. And Kathleen, let's hear. Did you have something like, oh, I wish I had said that? Any other thoughts you'd like to say?
I don't know if there's anything like specific that I really wanted to say, but one thing that I realized that we didn't touch a lot on that I'm sure people are going to be like, oh, they didn't talk about this, so that means something's going on, is the sponsorship and side of things. So I think that's maybe an important thing just to touch on, in that I do think that sometimes the sponsorships can be a problem. Like I'm a member of Dietitians of Canada, and therefore I get things in the mail from like PepsiCo, and I don't think that should be the way things are. And I do think that's a problem, but I think it's also important to know that doesn't mean that every single dietitian is in the pocket of some corporation just because we get things in the mail sometimes. We do still try to take a very evidence-based approach when we are looking at those products. And just because I get something in the mail doesn't mean that I automatically, give it out to clients or something like that. So I just wanted to bring up the point on sponsorship. And it definitely does affect the way that food policies are put together. And I think that that's a problem. So, for example, I think it was the Heart and Stroke Institute in Canada, they stopped doing sponsorships, and their recommendations, I noticed a shift in the way that they did things. They stopped doing the health check like they have in the States. And I did see just their content and the way that they talked about food was very different, and I really appreciated that. So I do think a shift towards, less of the sponsorship can be a good thing. But that being said, if a research study is sponsored by a food organization, that doesn't necessarily mean that you shouldn't look at the study at all, because researchers also have ethics, right, of saying we got funding from here, but they didn't, play any part in how we did the research study, because studies are expensive. So I think when people just totally write off any study that had funding from industry, I don't think that's fair to the scientists. I'm sure there are lots of research studies that come out that are very biased. But when you look at the disclosures and the way that things are discussed in studies, that doesn't mean that the scientists are in the pockets of industry. So I guess that's just kind of a few points that I wanted to make about the sponsorship.
Well, that was another problem was the cause and effect conclusion he drew there too, right? Like I do think that it's a little bit bizarre that some of these large organizations are sponsored by some particular industry or whatever, companies, businesses. I don't even know the right word. That does seem a bit concerning and maybe something to look into more. But does that necessarily mean that like every person in the healthcare field is just out to get you? No, like you said. And yeah, from our experience, I get the same things like, okay, yeah, I have some weird advertisements in some magazine that I subscribe to because I'm a dietitian. And yeah, like there's, the almond people are really on me. They really want me to recommend almonds. And, that's cool. But I guess the point is like that potentially is a problematic thing. I think it deserves more attention, more research. Maybe that's, Vinci, what you were thinking the film was going to be about, more of that type of thing. And perhaps they have a point there. And but does that mean that all recommendations are just totally based on trying to make you sick or trying to, make money? I don't know if that's totally fair conclusion either. But yeah, thanks for bringing that up. When I was saying, we could go in so many directions with this, that was kind of what I was referring to. Just like, okay, yeah, there's so much to say and there's so many topics. One of them being the sponsorships. So that is an interesting avenue to take, and I think could have some more exploration. So, yeah. Thanks for being here. This was a lot of your time. I appreciate all of your thoughts and wisdom in this arena, and I'm excited to share it with my listeners. And I really sincerely hope that people feel confident in their own ability to make their decisions about food in a way that's right for them. That's kind of our goal here. So thanks, Vinci and Kathleen, so much for being here. And everybody, make sure to follow them and reach out if you have questions. I'm sure they'd love to hear from you.
Yeah, thanks so much for having us.
Yeah, thanks so much, Paige.
Well, I sincerely hope you've enjoyed this conversation. If you haven't already, please go ahead and leave a review on iTunes. Thanks again so much for listening, and we'll see you soon for another episode.